Ethan Cross was not like other teenagers. He didn't go to school, he didn't have chores, and he certainly didn't worry about money. At just 17 years old, Ethan had everything he could ever want, and more. His family owned Neolux, one of the biggest tech companies in the world. They made everything from flying cars to robots that cooked meals, and they were richer than anyone could imagine. Ethan lived in a floating city called Skyhaven, a place so high above Earth that clouds drifted below his bedroom window every morning. It was a paradise for the super-rich, filled with gold-plated buildings, glowing streets, and shops selling things most people couldn't even dream of owning. For Ethan, life was perfect, or so he thought. But there was something missing. Ethan never felt truly happy. No matter how many gadgets he bought or parties he attended, he always felt empty inside. Maybe it was because his parents were too busy running their empire to spend time with him. Or maybe it was because he spent all his days surrounded by people who only cared about his money. Whatever the reason, Ethan often found himself bored and restless. One sunny afternoon, Ethan decided to visit a new store that had opened in Skyhaven. It was called Quantum Lux, and everyone was talking about it. The store sold futuristic items like holographic pets, virtual reality games, and AI assistants that could talk, think, and even tell jokes. Ethan figured it would be fun to check out the latest toys and waste some time. As soon as he walked into Quantum Lux, Ethan knew this place was special. The walls shimmered with neon lights, and shelves floated in midair, displaying products that looked almost magical. A robotic assistant greeted him at the door, saying, "Welcome, Master Cross. How may we assist you today?" Ethan smirked. "Just browsing," he said, though he already knew he'd end up buying half the store. That's what rich kids did. They shopped when they were bored. He wandered through the aisles, picking up gadgets and tossing them into his cart without even looking at the price tags. There was a levitating skateboard, a wristband that translated any language, and even a tiny robot dog that wagged its tail when Ethan patted it. None of these things impressed him much, but shopping made him feel powerful. After all, he could afford anything he wanted. At the checkout counter, Ethan noticed something unusual. The cashier wasn't a robot like he expected. It was a man. A real human being. This struck Ethan as strange because humans rarely worked in stores anymore. Most jobs were done by machines now. The man looked older, with short black hair and a calm expression on his face. He wore a plain blue uniform and stood behind the counter, scanning items quietly. Something about him seemed familiar, though Ethan couldn't quite place it. "Hey," Ethan said, leaning against the counter. "Aren't you Keanu Reeves?" The man glanced up and smiled faintly. "That's right." Ethan burst out laughing. "What are you doing here? Aren't you supposed to be, famous or something?" Keanu shrugged. "Fame doesn't last forever. Sometimes you just need a regular job." Ethan shook his head, still chuckling. "Man, this is wild. I can't believe someone like you was working as a cashier. Don't you miss being important?" Keanu tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing just a bit. "Importance isn't what it seems, kid. You'll figure that out someday." Ethan rolled his eyes. "Yeah, okay, whatever you say." He turned back to his cart and started unloading his purchases onto the counter. As Keanu scanned each item, Ethan kept glancing at him, trying to understand why such a well-known person would choose to work in the store. Finally, Ethan grew tired of waiting. "You know what?" he said suddenly. "I'm just gonna buy the whole store." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "The whole store?" "Yeah," Ethan replied with a grin. "Charge me for everything. Every gadget, every shelf, every light bulb. I'll take it all." Keanu hesitated for a moment before nodding slowly. "All right then. Let's see what we've got here." He tapped a few buttons on the register, and the screen lit up with numbers. The total cost flashed across the display, a number so large it made Ethan laugh again. "Easy," Ethan said, pulling out his credit chip. He waved it over the scanner, and the machine beeped, confirming the purchase. Done deal. For a brief second, nothing happened. Then the room began to glow. A soft blue light spread outward from the counter, filling the entire store. Ethan froze, staring around in confusion. "What's going on?" he asked, turning to Keanu. But Keanu wasn't smiling anymore. His face was serious, almost sad. "You shouldn't have done that, kid." Before Ethan could respond, the light grew brighter and brighter until it swallowed everything. When the glow faded, Ethan realized something was very wrong. Everyone in the store, the customers, the security guards, even the robots, was frozen in place. Their movements stopped completely, as if time itself had come to a halt. Ethan looked down at his hands. He could still move. Whatever had happened, it hadn't affected him. Panic bubbled up in his chest. "What did I do?" he whispered, spinning around to face Keanu. "Fix it. Make it stop." Keanu stepped away from the counter, his calm demeanor unchanged. "I can't fix it," he said, "but maybe you can." Ethan stared at him, wide-eyed. "Me? How am I supposed to fix this?" Keanu crossed his arms. "Because you're the one who caused it. Buying the whole store overloaded the quantum system. Now time is broken, and it's spreading. If you don't do something, the freeze will trap everyone, not just in this store, but everywhere." Ethan's mind raced. He didn't understand what Keanu was talking about, but one thing was clear. He was in trouble, big trouble. "So what do I do?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. Keanu sighed. "You'll have to travel through the frozen moments and undo the damage. But be warned, it won't be easy. And if you fail—" He trailed off, letting the weight of his words sink in. Ethan swallowed hard. For the first time in his life, he felt truly afraid. All his wealth, all his privileges, meant nothing now. He was alone in a world that had stopped moving, and the only person who could help him was a mysterious cashier named Keanu Reeves. As Keanu led Ethan toward the glowing blue pulse emanating from the counter, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change forever. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would test everything he thought he knew about himself and the world around him. The blue glow filled the store like a wave of light, washing over everything it touched. Ethan stood frozen, not because he was trapped, but because his mind couldn't process what was happening. One moment he had been joking around with Keanu Reeves and showing off his wealth. The next, time itself seemed to stop. Ethan looked around in disbelief. Everyone in the store was frozen in place. A woman reaching for a holographic pet had her hand suspended midair. A kid chasing after a floating toy robot hovered inches above the ground, his legs stuck in mid-run. Even the security drones hung motionless, their red scanning lights dimmed. It was as if someone had pressed a giant pause button on reality. What is this?" Ethan stammered, spinning around to face Keanu. His voice echoed slightly in the eerie silence. Keanu didn't answer right away. He stepped closer to Ethan, his expression calm but serious. "This," he said, gesturing at the frozen scene around them, "is your fault." "My fault?" Ethan snapped, his fear quickly turning into defensiveness. "How is this my fault? I just bought some stupid gadgets." Keanu crossed his arms. "You didn't just buy some stupid gadgets. You bought the entire store, all at once. That overloaded the quantum inventory system. This place runs on advanced tech that interacts with time itself. When you made that purchase, you created a ripple effect. Now time has stopped." Ethan blinked, trying to make sense of what Keanu was saying. "Wait, so you're telling me I broke time? Like actual time?" "Exactly," Keanu replied. "And it's spreading. If we don't fix it, this freeze will expand beyond this store. Soon, it'll trap everyone, forever." Ethan felt his stomach drop. Trapped forever? What does that even mean? "It means no one will move, talk, or live again," Keanu explained patiently. "They'll be stuck like statues, unable to do anything, including you, if we don't act fast." Ethan stared at him, his heart pounding. For the first time in his life, he felt completely powerless. Money couldn't fix this. His fancy gadgets couldn't save him. All his privilege meant nothing in this strange, frozen world. "So, what do we do?" Ethan asked finally, his voice trembling. Keanu sighed. "You have to undo the damage, but it won't be easy. The glitch you caused has spread through time itself. To fix it, you'll need to travel through frozen moments, snapshots of different eras, and repair the fractures." Ethan frowned. "Travel through time? Are you serious?" "I'm deadly serious," Keanu said, his tone firm. "Time isn't just a straight line. It's a web connecting every moment that ever happened. Your actions disrupted that web. Now you'll have to go back and fix the broken pieces." "But why me?" Ethan asked, throwing up his hands. "Why can't you do it?" "Because you're the one who caused this," Keanu replied simply. "Only you can set things right. Besides," he paused, looking Ethan directly in the eye, "this might be good for you. Maybe you'll learn something along the way." Ethan wanted to argue, but deep down, he knew Keanu was right. He had been reckless, selfish, and careless. And now he was paying the price. "Okay," Ethan muttered reluctantly. "So how does this work? Do I just jump into these frozen moments?" Keanu nodded. Yes, but you'll need guidance. I'll come with you, to a point. I'll show you where to start, but eventually, you'll have to face the challenges on your own. Before Ethan could ask more questions, Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. It looked like a wristband, glowing faintly with the same blue light that had filled the store. Keanu handed it to Ethan. What's this? Ethan asked, examining the band curiously. It's a chronometer, Keanu explained. It'll help you navigate through the frozen moments. It'll also protect you from the effects of the freeze. Without it, you'd be stuck like everyone else. Ethan slipped the chronometer onto his wrist. As soon as it clicked into place, the blue light pulsed brighter, sending a warm sensation through his arm. For a brief second, he felt a strange connection to the world around him, as if he could feel the flow of time itself. Ready? Keanu asked. Ethan hesitated. Not really, but I guess I don't have a choice. Keanu gave him a small smile. That's the spirit. With that, Keanu raised his hand and pointed at the glowing pulse emanating from the checkout counter. The light grew brighter, swirling into a vortex of shimmering colors. Ethan shielded his eyes as the vortex expanded, pulling them both inside. When Ethan opened his eyes, he found himself standing in a completely different place. Gone was the sleek interior of Quantum Lux. Instead, he was surrounded by towering stone columns and marble floors. People dressed in ancient Roman togas walked, or rather, floated around him, frozen in mid-step. The air smelled faintly of dust and incense. Where are we? Ethan asked, looking around in awe. Ancient Rome, Keanu replied. More specifically, the Colosseum during a gladiator battle. Ethan spotted two men in armor facing each other, their swords raised high. Between them lay a crowd of spectators, their cheers silenced by the freeze. Despite the stillness, the tension in the air was palpable. This is insane, Ethan muttered. Why are we here? To teach you your first lesson, Keanu said. Look closely at the gladiators. What do you see? Ethan squinted at the fighters. They were muscular and fierce, their faces locked in expressions of determination. I dunno. They look tough. They're fighting for honor, Keanu explained. In this era, people valued bravery and strength over wealth. Unlike you, they earned respect through hard work and sacrifice. Ethan bristled. Are you saying I don't work hard? I'm saying you've never had to, Keanu replied bluntly. Everything you have was handed to you. You've never struggled, never fought for anything. That's part of why you're here, to learn what it means to truly earn something. Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but before he could speak, Keanu pointed at a nearby vendor cart. Take a look at that. The cart was filled with golden coins, likely payment for food or souvenirs. Ethan reached out and grabbed a handful of coins, smirking. Cool, free money. Keanu shook his head. Try using those coins. Confused, Ethan held up one of the coins and waved it in front of a frozen vendor. Nothing happened. He tried shoving it into the man's hand, but the vendor didn't react. They don't care about your goal, Keanu said. In this moment, wealth means nothing. These people value courage, skill, and loyalty. Things you've never had to worry about. Ethan clenched his fists, frustration bubbling inside him. Fine. So what am I supposed to do here? Learn a lesson about being poor. No, Keanu said calmly. You're here to understand that there's more to life than money. Wealth doesn't define who you are. Actions do. Before Ethan could respond, the chronometer on his wrist began to beep. The blue light pulsed rapidly, signaling it was time to move on. Let's go, Keanu said. There's much more to see. As the vortex reopened, Ethan glanced back at the frozen gladiators one last time. Despite himself, he felt a pang of admiration for their bravery. Maybe Keanu was right. Maybe there was more to life than shopping sprees and luxury apartments. But as the swirling colors engulfed him once again, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest lessons were yet to come. Ethan and Keanu stepped out of the swirling vortex into their next frozen moment. This time, they found themselves standing in a dark, desolate wasteland. The sky was gray with ash, and the ground was cracked and barren. Buildings loomed in the distance, but they were crumbling and covered in vines. It looked like the aftermath of some catastrophic event, a world destroyed by neglect and greed. What is this place? Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He couldn't help but feel uneasy. The air smelled of smoke, and the silence was suffocating. This is Earth's future, Keanu replied grimly. A few hundred years from your time. Ethan's eyes widened. What happened here? You did, Keanu said bluntly. Well, not you personally, but people like you. Rich elites who cared more about profits than the planet. They ignored warnings about climate change, exploited resources, and left the poor to suffer. Eventually, the earth couldn't take it anymore. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. But I didn't do any of that. No, you didn't, Keanu admitted. But you're part of the system that allowed it to happen. Your family's company, Neolex, built machines that polluted the air and drained the oceans. And you've lived your whole life without thinking twice about it. Ethan wanted to argue, but he couldn't deny the truth. He had always known his family was powerful, but he'd never stopped to consider the consequences of their actions. Now, staring at the ruins of what was once a thriving planet, he felt a crushing weight of guilt. Come on, Keanu said, motioning for Ethan to follow him. There's someone here who wants to meet you. They walked through the wasteland until they came across a group of survivors huddled around a small fire. Their clothes were tattered, and their faces were lined with exhaustion. When Ethan and Keanu approached, the survivors turned to look at them, but only Ethan could move. To them, he and Keanu were just part of the frozen world. One of the survivors, an older woman with graying hair, stepped forward. She pointed a bony finger at Ethan. You, she spat. People like you ruin everything. Ethan flinched, taking a step back. I'm sorry. I didn't. Sorry won't bring back my home, the woman interrupted. Your kind took everything from us. You hoarded food, water, and medicine while the rest of us starved. You let the planet die so you could live in luxury. Ethan opened his mouth to defend himself, but no words came out. What could he say? He was part of that world. His wealth and privilege were built on the suffering of others. For the first time, he realized how selfish he had been. Keanu placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. This is your second lesson, he said softly. Every choice you make has consequences, not just for you, but for everyone else. Ignoring those consequences doesn't make them go away. Ethan nodded slowly, tears welling up in his eyes. He wanted to apologize again, but he knew it wouldn't matter. Words couldn't fix what had been broken. Instead, he silently vowed to do better. To be better. Before they could leave, one of the younger survivors, a girl no older than 10, caught Ethan's eye. She held up a small wilted flower. We used to have gardens, she whispered. Now all we have are memories. The sight of the flower broke Ethan's heart. He reached out to take it, but his hand passed right through. Even in this frozen moment, he couldn't touch anything real. It was a painful reminder of how disconnected he was from the world around him. The chronometer beeped again, signaling it was time to move on. Ethan followed Keanu into the vortex, bracing himself for whatever came next. When they emerged, they found themselves in a bustling city filled with neon lights and towering skyscrapers. Hovercars zipped through the air, and massive holographic billboards advertised products Ethan recognized from his own time. Everything was loud, bright, and chaotic. Where are we now? Ethan asked, shielding his eyes from the glare of the lights. A cyberpunk city, Keanu replied. About 50 years in your future. Ethan looked around in awe. Despite the chaos, the city was undeniably impressive. Advanced technology was everywhere, from robotic street vendors to AI assistants walking alongside humans. But something felt off. The people seemed cold and distant, their faces glued to glowing screens or hidden behind masks. This place looks amazing, Ethan said, trying to sound enthusiastic. It's like Sky Haven, but even cooler. It's not as great as it seems, Keanu warned. Look closer. As Ethan wandered through the streets, he noticed things he hadn't seen at first glance. Homeless people huddled in alleys, ignored by the wealthy elite passing by. Factories belched thick smoke into the already polluted air, and despite the flashy gadgets and holograms, there was a sense of emptiness, a lack of connection between people. Then Ethan saw something that made his blood run cold. Standing in front of a store window was a boy who looked exactly like him. Same face, same clothes, same cocky smirk. But this version of Ethan was younger, around 12 or 13. What the? Ethan muttered, stepping closer. It's you, Keanu said, or rather, who you used to be. The younger Ethan stared into the store window, admiring the expensive gadgets on display. He pulled out a credit chip and waved it in front of the scanner, buying everything in sight without a second thought. Then he turned and walked away, tossing the items aside as if they were trash. Ethan watched in horror as the scene repeated itself over and over. The younger version of himself kept buying things, showing off, and discarding them without care. Each loop revealed a new layer of selfishness and waste. I was such a jerk, Ethan whispered, shaking his head. Yes, you were, Keanu agreed. but you still can be. That's why you're here, to break the cycle. Ethan clenched his fists, anger rising inside him, not at Keanu, but at himself. He hated seeing how reckless and entitled he had been. More than anything, he wanted to change. I get it, Ethan said finally. I messed up. I wasted so much, hurt so many people, but I want to fix it. Tell me what to do. Keanu smiled faintly. That's the right attitude. But remember, fixing things isn't about grand gestures. It's about small choices, the kind you make every day. Be kind, be thoughtful, think about others before yourself. Ethan nodded, determination replacing his guilt. For the first time, he felt like he had a purpose. He wasn't just a spoiled rich kid anymore. He was someone who could make a difference if he worked hard enough. Their final stop was a quiet park nestled between two skyscrapers. Unlike the rest of the city, this place was peaceful. Trees swayed gently in the breeze, and birds chirped overhead. A young couple sat on a bench, holding hands and laughing. Nearby, a child played with a dog, chasing after a ball. This is what the world could be, Keanu said, gesturing at the scene, if people choose to care. Ethan smiled, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time. Maybe the damage wasn't irreversible. Maybe, just maybe, he could help create a better future. The chronometer pulsed brightly, signaling the end of their journey. As the vortex reopened, Ethan took one last look at the park. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he was ready to face it. Let's go, he said, his voice steady. I have work to do. Ethan and Keanu stepped out of the swirling vortex and found themselves back in Quantum Lux, the store where it all began. The glowing blue pulse still emanated from the checkout counter, casting eerie shadows across the frozen scene. Customers, staff, and robots remained stuck in place, suspended in time like statues. This is it, Keanu said, his voice calm but serious. The final moment. Ethan looked around, taking in the familiar surroundings. It felt strange to be back here after everything he'd seen. Ancient Rome, the ruined future, the cyberpunk city, all those frozen moments had changed him in ways he couldn't fully explain. He wasn't the same carefree, selfish teenager who had walked into this store earlier. Now he understood the weight of his actions and the cost of fixing them. What happens now? Ethan asked, glancing at Keanu. Keanu crossed his arms. Now comes the hardest part. You have a choice to make, a choice that will determine the fate of everyone caught in this freeze. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. What kind of choice? Keanu gestured toward the glowing pulse. The glitch you caused isn't just affecting this store anymore. It's spreading outward, freezing more and more of reality. If we don't stop it soon, the entire timeline will collapse. Billions of lives will be trapped forever. Ethan swallowed hard. Okay, so how do we stop it? There are two options, Keanu explained. Option 1. You erase yourself from existence. By removing your presence from the timeline, we can undo the chain reaction you started and restore normalcy. But if you choose this path, you'll cease to exist. No memories of you will remain, not even for me. Ethan blinked, stunned. Wait, I'd just disappear? Like I never existed. Keanu nodded solemnly. Yes, you're like your family, your legacy. It'll all vanish. The world will go on as if you were never born. Ethan stared at him, his mind racing. Erasing himself sounded terrifying. He didn't want to die, or worse, to never have lived at all. But then again, hadn't he already learned how selfish he'd been? How much harm his reckless actions had caused? And option 2? Ethan asked quietly. Keanu hesitated before answering. Option 2 is simpler, but far more dangerous. You let the freeze spread uncontrollably. Time will shatter completely, trapping everyone, including you, in eternal stasis. No movement, no thoughts, no escape. Just endless silence. Ethan shuddered at the thought. Being frozen forever sounded worse than death. At least erasing himself would save others. But could he really sacrifice everything? His identity, his memories, his very existence, for people he barely knew. I don't know what to do, Ethan admitted, sitting down on the floor. His head was spinning. Why does it have to be my decision? Because it's your responsibility, Keanu replied gently. You created this mess. Only you can fix it. Ethan buried his face in his hands, trying to think clearly. Memories of his journey through the frozen moments flooded his mind. The gladiators in ancient Rome, fighting for honor instead of wealth. The survivors in the ruined future, blaming people like him for destroying the planet. The younger version of himself, wasting resources without a second thought. And finally, the peaceful park in the cyberpunk city, a glimpse of what the world could be if people cared enough to change. I've made so many mistakes, Ethan whispered, tears welling up in his eyes. I've hurt so many people without even realizing it. Is this my chance to make things right? Keanu knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. It's not about making up for past mistakes. It's about choosing who you want to be moving forward. Redemption isn't easy, Ethan. It requires sacrifice. Ethan wiped his tears and stood up, determination replacing his fear. I don't want to run away anymore. If erasing myself is the only way to fix this, then I'll do it. Keanu studied him carefully. Are you sure? This isn't something you can take back. I'm sure, Ethan said firmly. For once in my life, I want to do the right thing, even if it costs me everything. Keanu gave him a small, approving smile. Then let's get started. He led Ethan to the glowing pulse at the center of the store. The light pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. Keanu pulled out a small device, a sleek silver cube, and handed it to Ethan. What's this? Ethan asked, turning the cube over in his hands. It's a memory core, Keanu explained. It contains every moment of your life, your joys, your regrets, your dreams. Once you activate it, your essence will merge with the timeline, undoing the damage you caused. But remember, once it's done, there's no going back. Ethan nodded, clutching the cube tightly. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what came next. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to think about all the things he'd miss, his luxurious home, his gadgets, even the little moments of happiness he'd taken for granted. Then he reminded himself why he was doing this. All right, Ethan said, his voice steady. Let's end this. Keanu stepped back, giving Ethan space. With trembling hands, Ethan pressed the button on the memory core. Instantly, the cube lit up, emitting a brilliant white light that engulfed the room. The glowing pulse from the checkout counter flared brighter, reacting to the surge of energy. As the light consumed him, Ethan felt a strange sensation, like he was being pulled apart and stitched back together all at once. Flashes of his life played before his eyes. The first time he flew a hover car, the arguments with his parents, the laughter of friends he rarely spent time with. Each memory faded away, leaving behind a sense of peace. In the final moments, Ethan saw the faces of the people he'd met during his journey, the gladiators, the survivors, the child with the flower. They smiled at him, their expressions filled with gratitude. He realized that his sacrifice wasn't just about fixing the timeline. It was about proving to himself that he could be better. And then, everything went dark. When the light faded, the store returned to normal. Time resumed its flow, and the frozen customers and staff blinked back to life, unaware of what had happened. Keanu stood alone by the checkout counter, the memory core now inactive in his hand. A young girl approached him, holding a small robot dog she had been admiring earlier. Excuse me, sir, she said shyly. Can I still buy this? Keanu smiled softly. Of course. Take all the time you need. As the girl walked away, Keanu glanced at the empty spot where Ethan had stood. Though the boy was gone, his impact lingered, a ripple effect of kindness and selflessness that would spread throughout the timeline. Far above Earth, a new constellation appeared in the night sky. Its stars formed the shape of a smiling face, a faint reminder of a boy who gave everything to save the world. The world didn't notice when time started flowing again. People went about their lives as if nothing unusual had happened. In Quantum Lux, customers continued shopping, employees rang up purchases, and robots restocked shelves. No one remembered the eerie blue glow or the frozen moments that had briefly halted reality. Except for Keanu Reeves. He stood quietly by the checkout counter, watching the bustling activity around him. His expression was calm but tinged with sadness. He knew what Ethan had done, how the boy had sacrificed himself to fix the timeline and save billions of lives. Though Ethan was gone, his choice would leave an indelible mark on the world. Keanu slipped the deactivated memory cord into his pocket and walked out of the store. Outside, sky heaven sparkled under the sunlight, its floating buildings gleaming like jewels against the endless blue sky. But something felt different. Subtle changes were beginning to ripple through society, almost imperceptibly at first. In a classroom in one of Skyhaven's elite academies, a teacher asked her students to share ideas for a group project. One boy raised his hand enthusiastically. We should design a recycling system for spaceships, he suggested. It'll help reduce waste in space. Another student chimed in. Yeah, and we can use materials that don't harm the environment. The teacher smiled, surprised by their enthusiasm. Just months ago, these same kids would have complained about homework or argued over who got to play with the coolest gadgets. Now they seemed genuinely interested in solving real-world problems. Across town, a wealthy businessman named Mr. Aldrin sat in his office, staring at a report on his desk. It detailed the environmental impact of Neolux, the tech company once owned by Ethan's family. For years, Neolux had prioritized profits over sustainability, leaving behind a trail of pollution and resource depletion. But after recent scandals and public outcry, Mr. Aldrin realized it was time for change. He picked up his phone and dialed his assistant. "Cancel my meetings for the afternoon," he said firmly. "I'm drafting a new initiative. From now on, Neolux will focus on green technology and ethical practices. We owe it to the planet and to future generations." His assistant sounded shocked. "Are you sure, sir? This could affect our stock prices." "I don't care about stock prices," Mr. Aldrin interrupted. "If we keep going the way we are, there won't be a future worth investing in." Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of Skyhaven, a young girl named Melita wandered through a park. She was holding a shiny credit card she found on the ground earlier. At first, she thought it might belong to someone important, a celebrity or a billionaire. But when she tried using it at a vending machine, the card didn't work. Frustrated, she tossed it aside and decided to save her allowance instead. As she sat on a bench, feeding breadcrumbs to birds, Mia noticed a poster nearby. It advertised a community event called Skyhaven Cares, where volunteers cleaned parks, planted trees, and helped those in need. Intrigued, she jotted down the details and promised herself she'd attend next weekend. "Maybe I can make a difference too," she murmured to herself, smiling faintly. Days turned into weeks, and the subtle shifts in behavior grew stronger. Across Earth, people began prioritizing kindness over convenience, community over consumption. Corporations adopted eco-friendly policies, governments invested in renewable energy, and individuals started small acts of generosity that added up to big changes. Even in the ruins of the post-apocalyptic wasteland Ethan had visited, signs of renewal appeared. Survivors banded together to replant crops, purify water sources, and rebuild homes. They spoke often of a mysterious shift in the air, a feeling that things were finally looking up. One evening, a woman named Clara stood atop a hill overlooking her village. She held a wilted flower in her hand, the same kind Ethan had seen during his journey. As she gazed at the horizon, she whispered, "Thank you, whoever you are." Back in Skyhaven, Keanu watched these changes unfold from afar. He knew Ethan's sacrifice had sparked something extraordinary, a chain reaction of goodwill and responsibility. Though no one remembered Ethan's name, his legacy lived on in every act of kindness, every tree planted, every life touched by the ripple effect of his selflessness. Late one night, Keanu climbed to the highest point in Skyhaven, a glass observation deck that offered a breathtaking view of the stars. He leaned against the railing, gazing upward. Among the constellations, he spotted a new formation, a cluster of stars shaped like a smiling face. "Good job, kid," Keanu murmured, a hint of pride in his voice. "You did it." For a moment, he imagined Ethan standing beside him, grinning mischievously as he used to. But the image faded quickly, replaced by the vast expanse of the cosmos. Keanu sighed, knowing his work here was done. There were other timelines to protect, other glitches to fix. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. Somewhere deep within his pocket, the memory core pulsed faintly, carrying the echoes of a boy who had chosen to give everything for the greater good. Months later, in a tiny cafe in Skyhaven, a teenage girl flipped through a history book. She paused at a page describing the rise of sustainable technology and the global shift toward empathy and cooperation. The text mentioned several influential figures, but none of them rang a bell. "Who do you think started all this?" the girl asked her friend, pointing at the book. Her friend shrugged. "I dunno. Maybe it was just everyone working together." The girl nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, maybe." Unbeknownst to them, a shimmering constellation twinkled above, casting a soft glow over the city. Its stars formed the shape of a smiling face, a silent reminder of a boy who had changed the world without ever being remembered. And somewhere in the infinite web of time, Ethan Cross smiled too.